Alrighty. Going to talk about a couple of things here. It seems the elites are determined to get everybody in the rent trap. You know, I know somebody who's suffering from failure to launch. In the terms of the way Jordan Peterson explains it, is basically where, you know, your parents left school and they got ahead and they went further and further ahead, and things got somewhere, things went somewhere. They achieved, they kept going, they got bigger, they bought a house, they had kids, they could afford cars, and at the end of the retirement they had some money. And they sort of continuously built on what they had the previous year to actually get somewhere. This young lady, I was talking to her, and she's like an absolute multitude of young women these days. And, you know, quite a number of young men too, although some young men seem to sort of work it out a bit, but then not always. Quite often they don't either. And she had plans and the whole lot fell in the bin earlier this year. And, of course, she was very upset and sort of got a bit down about it all and everything. Quite down about it all. And, you know, women have a higher occurrence of negative trait emotions than men do, meaning that women get depressed twice as often more than men will. So anyway, hasn't had a good year, and we were talking about it, and I sort of said it's one of these things like, you know, she said it seems to be getting harder as I'm getting older, and I said it's one of these things where when you wake up one day and you realise your life is no further ahead than it was 3 years ago, that's what's making it hard, because you've spent 3 years going to a job, working, and you don't see, you know, plans fail and fuck up, and then you realise that you're no further ahead today than you were 3 years ago. So what the fuck was the last 3 years of going to work for? You know? You've worked 3 years to tread water? Is it? And this is part of the reason why you feel so bad. And she agreed with that. And it's true. You know, I hit the nail on the damn head. What they're trying to do, essentially, in many ways, is stop people from putting down roots, stop people from really getting ahead. They want everybody to have failure to launch. And this is so they can keep you on the treadmill. This is... The bastards are trying to do serfdom 2.0. That's what it really comes down to. For those of you who don't know, many wealthy people back in the early days of maybe the Middle Ages and stuff, and right through into the 1700s and all that, you know, a lot of the wealthy had a lot of land that they got, because in most cases it was inherited, and they would basically have tenants on their land, and they would charge them not in money, but the tenants would grow grain, and they would take 30% of their grain as rent. They would sell that grain. They put in absolutely $0. They just own the land. The peasants done all the work. The serfs done all the work. They ate most of the 60 or 70% of the grain that they had left. And, you know, basically they would have none left by the time they finished eating, pretty much. And they still wouldn't be well fed, but 30, maybe 40% would be taken by the landowner, who put in absolutely $0 and then would just sell that grain and make money off of that. And so you had a whole generations of tenants who were continuously in poverty, and somebody who invested bloody zero to get to be an extremely wealthy person. And most of that was inherited from generation to generation. If it didn't increase, which it often did, as England got hold of more colonies. And, keep in mind that they had India in the 1600s. Yeah, so... and some of these money they'd make, they'd invested in tea plantations in India, Sri Lanka, and stuff like that. The reality is they're pushing for something to be very similar to happen today. And you've got places like, you say, oh, well, I'm stuck behind a landlord. Nah. A lot of landlords, particularly after COVID, are having a few issues, particularly because people couldn't pay their rent. And individual landlords are starting to disappear in America. Now you might go, oh, thank God, individual. No, don't praise that shit. They're being replaced by corporate ones who have big money to kick your ass in court. They're not an individual landlord. They're literally a corporation. And so often these people are large investment firms. These people are like quasi-banks almost. They're literally Wall Street. And you have a place called BlackRock, also known as Blackstone, that's in Wall Street. This is one of these big Wall Street titans, whatever you want to call them. In a deal recently, they bought 12,000 apartments and 54 shopping centres in one deal worth $5.8 billion. That's what it cost them. And this is the way we're going. We're heading into this you will own nothing and you will love it. What they want is for people to be not owning a house, not owning a rundown cottage that they've fixed up with plywood they got from work. They're sort of after everybody having a service industry job, all the manufacturing done in Asia, poorer countries, wherever, and they want everybody to be in a service job, jumping from gig to gig, in one rented house in one town and in another rented house. But they move with the work, nobody's ever there for any more than a few years or whatever, and there's no sense of community, because when you have community, you can band together and you can create a larger force than if you're an individual. An individual, even let's say Tom, well, what the fucking name was, the Unabomber. I forget his damn name. He had like a Polish last name or something. He created a certain amount of mayhem as one person. You can say Timothy McVeigh, but the people believe there's a lot of other people that were involved with him. Too many eyewitnesses saw a black dude involved with him, and none of that. They buried all of that, regardless of multiple news items on it. But one person can't do much, but when you're together as a group, it's very different. And I'm not necessarily saying terrorism, I'm just saying the ability to afford good lawyers and have a class action and things like that. It's one of these things that, like, if they stop you from having community, and nobody sort of belongs to an area, then they can knock out a bunch of houses and put an interstate through the middle. They can do this thing, they can do that thing, they can do something or other else. They can build a dirty big stinking industry right next to a residential area. Especially if it's in the side of town that the politicians don't live in, and there's a couple of bribes that go under the table and things like this. They can do a lot of stuff that everybody goes, oh, well, I'm not really from here, so it doesn't really matter to me. And then everybody just folds and apathy occurs because, well, this job's probably only going to go for another year and a half, so just put up with the fact that there's some, and there's no community, there's no sense of belonging. Nobody feels that they, like, it's their place and this is how they get you. This is also very dangerous, particularly, you know, in women, because when they fail to have kids and find a guy and things go ahead, you know, because they're always looking for the guy who's, you know, really got it together. But then if all the jobs are minimum wage and you're all just jumping from one rental property to another, they're looking for a guy who will bring them out of all of that. So then ultimately they don't get married, or they're just taken by all this consumeristic crap, or they just don't feel in their mind settled enough in one place because they don't feel a sense of community enough for them to want to have children and settle in a place, because the work's unstable, because we're only renting and we're never going to own this place, because and then next thing you know, you got a dramatic population decline and they replace you all with Mexicans who work in a place that has multiple OH&S violations for below minimum wage, and we'll say you're on the correct rate, but you're only doing 20 hours a week where you're actually doing 40 hours a week on half the minimum wage. Shit like this can fly under the radar because the immigrant wants to stay, and this is how they work it all. Well, we need to bring more people in because nobody's having babies. Yeah, but life is so unsettled and so many people are just struggling along that no woman feels safe enough to have kids, you know what I'm saying? And this is the thing, like, you know, even if there was a guy who was a bit richer than the rest, is there really enough of a sense of community? Is there really enough of a sense of belonging for them to really, you know, put down roots in a rental property? You know what I'm saying? It's just, I'm not talking about white trash. I mean, white trash have kids when they're still in high school, but you know what I mean. But it's one of these things, you know, they want you, like they're building kitchens, and I don't know, you Americans probably know about this. Australians, you might not. I've been told this years ago. They've got apartments that don't have any more than a tiny bench that's probably bloody 3 foot by 2 foot or something like this, and a sink, and a spot for a refrigerator, and a slot for a microwave on top of the fridge if you didn't just literally put your microwave on top of your fridge, which many people do. And that's it. No oven, no dishwasher, no nothing. They're just, these are designed to be cheap, but they're also designed for people who eat out every night. So they don't want you to own a car. They want you to take an Uber. They want you to rent. They want you to eat out almost every single night. They want you, at the end of the day, to have no money saved and be living like this temporary life, like a guy who permanently lives in a tent. It's not a real solid doors and you know, roof over your head. It's like a temporary existence, and it's not so much physically a temporary existence, it's financially a temporary existence for the rest of your damn life. And you had all the Uber Eats and then you took an Uber to work, and then if you didn't use public transport or ride a bike, and then you're paying rent, and then you're buying all the trinkets because eBay keeps showing you this, and then your brain's like a friggin' washing machine on spin cycle because you spend all this time watching TikTok, which they've found actually causes autism-style tics, you know, like little twitches and all that bullshit in kids who watch more than a certain amount of TikTok on a daily or weekly basis. And this is, it's just part of this scatterbrain, short attention span, paycheck to paycheck type world, and not necessarily paycheck to paycheck living very poor, but paycheck to paycheck wasting everything you've got with no money saved, no sense of community, no backstop to save your ass, and you save your ass with a credit card that you've still got to work out how you're going to cover later on. So then they got you entrapped in, well, I got to go back to work because I only got a bond on this new rental place at this new job, and I got to keep this job because I've got to pay the credit card off that paid the bond on this new place I'm at. It's not the way the world's meant to be. It's a sneaky return to serfdom. And, this is why I talk about options. And, one of the big phrases where you can tell someone stuff's up, things didn't work out how I wanted. No, nothing's going to work out how you wanted. You got to compromise. You got to find gaps, holes, ways around it. Yes, I inherited a bit of land that still had some debt on it, but I had a head start. I could have done a similar thing by living in a van for 5 or 10 years. You got to find alternative gaps where you're going to have to compromise worse than living in a rental property in order to get ahead enough to buy yourself a house way out in the middle of the country in a small 2-horse town that still has good internet so you can work remotely on a computer, because that's how you're going to avoid the rent trap. Ways and means. You've got to really, really, really think outside the box. You're going to have to compromise. If you want everything, things didn't work out how I wanted. Yeah, well, they never will. And you never will get outside of the rent trap. You never will get anywhere if you think like that. What you got to do, right, is work out what compromises you can make to weave your way through the system like a snake weaving left and right, to then get to fairly close, 80% of the goal that you originally intended. Because nothing will work straight your way. Why? Because they tied all that in knots. It costs so much for college that you can't, bloody near pay it back. But I went to college to get a good job, to then buy a house, but you're still paying off this 150,000, 200,000, 250 college debt, student loan debt. This is the thing, they're all wired it, so you will be screwed unless you find this really bizarre, twisty way of compromises and alternative living to be able to break out of this shit show. And so that shows a failure when it's things didn't work out how I wanted. Well, that shows your mentality, your mindset rather. Your mindset is already headed in the wrong direction because you don't have things work directly for you. You've got to weave your way through your options and tack one thing to another and make compromises and play the hand of cards you've got to make things work. That's the way you eventually get to where you are. And this I want it all, I want it now mentality, it didn't work out exactly how I wanted it. Well, no wonder, because it's designed not to, and it never will if you go directly for what you want instead of compromise and find different solutions to finally wiggle your way up the ladder to where you at least own a shit house somewhere and you've got that rental monkey off your back.